Hey, 2024 was the biggest year ever for me for reading. I set myself a challenge of 12 books in 12 months and absolutely smashed it. So today I thought I'd go through everything I read in 2024 and rank them on a tier list. These rankings are to do with my enjoyment of the book instead of how good the book actually is. And let me tell you, there were some bangers this year. So let's get straight into the tier list. Starting with the first book of the year, which was Guards by Terry Pratchett. This was the first Terry Pratchett book that I read, and it was the first book I read this year in a time of the year where I was focusing on reading short, entertaining reads instead of going for these massive fantasy epics that have been sitting on my shelf. And Guards was exactly that. It was short, entertaining, extremely funny, and has opened me up to a whole world of amazing books by Terry Pratchett. His usage of the English language is just phenomenal, and the book was so enthralling and so entertaining in so few pages. I was absolutely blown away, and that's why this one is 100% going in the S tier. Going along the same vein of short, entertaining reads, I picked up my first ever cozy fantasy book, which was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldtree. This is a really low stakes fantasy book. It's very Dungeons and Dragons-esque, and it basically follows an orc who opens up a coffee shop. And we get to see her journey in opening this coffee shop and the troubles that she faces, the friends she meets along the way. There's a little bit of romance dripped in there, but overall it's just this cozy feeling. This book is happy. It's something to sit down and read next to a fire, and I really enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong, it's not an epic fantasy. It's not something that's going to blow you away, but it is something that's written so perfectly for what it was aiming to do. And again, we're chucking this one in the S tier. Now, I know I said this tier list is books, but let's be honest, I did read some other things this year. Even though my manga reading took a bit of a backseat, I still started and finished some amazing series. The first of which was one that I continued, which is One Piece. Now, I've done multiple videos on One Piece, so I won't touch on it too much here, but it is just one of the greatest stories ever written. I've barely even scratched the surface, and I am so enthralled and so in love. And I know this is getting boring, but again, this one's got to go in the S tier. This Is How You Lose the Time War was a really interesting book. It's a love story, and it's written by two different authors in a letter type format. You've got two characters talking to each other through letters, and you get to watch this relationship develop through the hardships that these people face because they are both time agents. They travel in time and they are battling against each other. It's rooted in that Romeo and Juliet vibe, but with extremely high sci-fi concepts. Now, I enjoyed this book quite a lot. However, I did think it was a little bit too smart for me. Whilst I enjoy reading a lot, the more kind of purpley prose sometimes puts me off. And this book is written very poetically. It's written very well, but maybe not so much in the way that I enjoy. However, the concepts here are really interesting, and the way the book is formatted, it's something that I've never come across before and something that I would 100% enjoy reading again. And that's why this book is going in the A tier. If you're watching this channel, you probably like reading. And if you like reading, then you probably need things to read. Well, I've got just the site for you, Sci-Fi. Sci-Fi is an absolutely wonderful bookstore that specializes in sci-fi, fantasy, comic books, and of course, manga. I've been using them for absolutely ages because they not only have great pricing but also fantastic customer service and top-notch packaging. Like, look at this. If you want to use Sci-Fi yourself, you can head down to the link in the description and use the code NERDLOUNGE for 5% off every order. So get yourself some books, get yourself a discount, and support the channel at the same time. Back to the video. To start off the second quarter of the year, I thought it was about time to start doing two things. Number one, listening to audiobooks, and number two, starting a fantasy epic series. And to cover both of these bases, I chose Joe Abercrombie's The Blade Itself, the first book in the First Law trilogy. This book is phenomenal. It is honestly one of the best written fantasy books ever. Not just in the world that it builds or the story that it's trying to tell, but predominantly in the characters that it portrays. These may be some of the best written characters in all of fiction. You've got Sandan Glokta, you've got Logan Ninefingers, and these characters are so enthralling and so interesting that a book like The Blade itself, where not really very much happens, is still one of the most intense and encapsulating reads that I had all year. And the audiobook, read by Stephen Pacey, is absolutely amazing. I recommend that 100%. It's the best audiobook that I've listened to, and I haven't listened to many, but that's still high praise. Whilst I think this book is fantastically written, I wouldn't quite put it up in the S tier. I wasn't completely and utterly addicted and in love with this book, so it's going in A tier, just above This Is How You Lose the Time War. Next up is another manga which I started and by the end of the year finished, which is Jujutsu Kaisen. Now this manga's an interesting one because the story itself and the anime are really, really good. The anime is what got me into reading the manga. I watched the anime and then I binged the rest of the manga. And yes, it is a cool series. It's probably one of my favorite shonens. However, it has its flaws. Quite majorly it has its flaws. There are problems with the art, there's problems with the storytelling, and the final arc just didn't live up to the expectations that it set out. But overall, I really enjoyed reading Jujutsu Kaisen. The Shibuya arc is probably in my top 5 manga arcs of all time. Kento Nanami is one of my favorite anime characters of all time. This series is great, but it has its problems, so it's gonna have to sit in B tier. When I tell you I read some heaters this year, I really read some heaters this year. Not gonna lie, my top 10 books of all time has massively changed due to the stuff I'm reading this year, and one of those things is the Red Rising series. Red Rising book 1 is probably the fastest that I have ever finished a book up to the point where I read it. That's gonna make sense in a bit. It's this sci-fi story about Darrow, a character who is starting a rebellion, and I don't want to give too much away because reading this book completely blind was one of the most mind-blowing experiences that I've ever had. All I will say is it is a sci-fi book. You have these hints of rebellion, but the majority of book 1 is very Hunger Game-esque, and some people don't like that, other people do. I, for one, really enjoyed the entire book, but if you're not quite feeling the Hunger Games aspect, you still should read this, just because the next book, we'll talk about that in a minute. But for me, Red Rising was absolutely phenomenal, and it's going at the bottom of S tier. The Shining Girls by Lauren Buke is a sort of time travel murder mystery story, and this year I was really looking for those time travel books. One of my favorite TV shows of all time is a series called Dark, and I was looking for something along those lines, and unfortunately this one wasn't quite what I was looking for. I did do this in audiobook, which I think may have caused a bit of disservice because I don't think the audiobook was that great, but overall this book had a really cool premise of a house that can travel in time and a serial killer who uses this house to visit different time periods, and one of his victims who is trying to investigate and catch him. It's an interesting premise. It didn't quite pull off what I wanted to, and it took a very long time to get to the climax. So unfortunately, this was my least favorite book that I read this year, and it's going in the C tier. On the polar opposite of the spectrum, we've got Vinland Saga. Vinland Saga is a Viking manga. It's a Viking story that follows Thorfinn, a character who is hell-bent on revenge. But that's only the first part of the story. Where Vinland Saga is so special is in the way that it subverts your expectations. It changes from this story about revenge to this story about peace and about swearing off of violence and becoming a better man and making better of the world around you. It is one of the most emotional stories that I've ever read. It's one of the most thought-provoking stories that I've ever read. I cannot sing Vinland Saga's praises enough, and I made a whole video about why this manga is so special that you should definitely check out. But Vinland Saga is 100% going in the top of S tier. for now.
My dream has always been to turn this YouTube thing into my full-time job. And the first step to doing that is going to be to hire an editor. So for you guys that are enjoying the content and want a way to help support the growth of this channel, I've created a Patreon with the aim to spend all the money on hiring an editor and bringing more higher quality content to you guys. However, I think it's wrong to just ask you for money. So I've created some rewards specifically for Patreon members as a way to say thank you. So if you like the content and you want to support me, you can head over to the Patreon now. I love you all. Thanks.
Next up, we've got another Terry Pratchett book, which is Men at Arms. This is the second book in the City Watch series, so it follows on from Guards. We get to look in on all the characters once again. And this has exactly the same positives that Guards has. Again, it's an interesting mystery. It's got funny characters, and the way that Terry Pratchett uses the English language is unlike any author I have ever read. The man was an absolute mastermind, and I cannot wait to read more of his books. This one took on more of a murder mystery tone, and whilst I did like the mystery and I did like the story, I don't think it quite caught me as much as Guards did. So this one's going to go in A tier. Next up, we've got Coraline. I'm sure most people have heard of Coraline. They made an extremely good animated adaptation of it. But it's a children's story that basically follows Coraline, a young girl who sets foot into a strange, dangerous version of her own world. And she is faced with a strange, dangerous version of her own family. It's extremely creepy, and even reading this as an adult, it is scary, which is crazy to think about reading this as a child. I absolutely adore the movie, and the book was basically just the same. For nostalgia reasons, I think I prefer the movie, and the book was very fast, it was very simple, but at the same time, it was entertaining. So this is going to go in the bottom of B tier. Speaking about simple, fast, and entertaining, let's talk about All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is the first book in the Murderbot series, a first-person diary-style book about a Murderbot. The Murderbot, who is a sentient robot who has hacked his governor module, and he has gained basically freedom to do as he wishes. And we see him exploring life in this strange scenario and seeing how he grows and how he grows to come to love or care for the people around him. And it's just so brilliantly written. The character just drips in neurodiversity, which I just find so interesting to read. And the series itself is great. I've really enjoyed reading it. They're so short, they're literally 2 to 3 hours long on audiobook, and they are entertaining, high octane, high action, and they are funny as well. The characters are well written. Murderbot is just a phenomenal protagonist. This book, for me, was an A tier. And the follow-up book to All Systems Red, Artificial Condition, was just another load of the same. I really enjoyed this one too. It introduced some new characters that I really liked, and I'm hoping to see more of in the rest of the series. This is going in A tier as well. And here it is, the best book that I read this year, which has slotted itself in my top 3 books of all time. It's my second favorite book of all time, and that is Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. The follow-up to Red Rising is a story that I was not expecting. Red Rising was great. I loved it. I gave it an S tier, but Golden Sun, it's an S+. It's a 6 out of 5 star. It's honestly so insane to see how much this artist grew between these 2 books, because they could have been written by 2 completely different people. Golden Sun is a space opera. It is a sci-fi through and through. We have space battles and wars and rebellion, and Darrow is such a fantastic protagonist to follow. And there's something this book did to me which has never happened before. I was enthralled. I was reading it every second that I could. This is the fastest book I've ever finished in my life. I absolutely adore this book, and the ending, I'm not going to spoil it, but the ending made me throw the book across the room, and that has never happened before. It got such a physical reaction out of me, I threw the book across the room. Golden Sun is the reason that you can read Red Rising, not like it, and you have to carry on. It is honestly one of the best books I have ever read, and 100% this is going in the top of S tier. Before They Are Hanged, the second book in the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, is, for me, an A tier book. And it's really hard to rank this between The Blade itself and Before They Are Hanged, because Before They Are Hanged doesn't have as good of the character moments, but it has a much better through story. This book is a parody, a interpretation of the classic fantasy formula, the formula that was set a precedent by Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. It has this fellowship of characters going on the journey, but it subverts those themes so well, and that is why this book for me was so great, is because of that subversion. I am such a massive fan of Lord of the Rings, and this just seems like the antithesis, the polar opposite to Lord of the Rings, and I love it for that. It's also got fantastic action, and we get to see the characters in a better light. It's got some of my favorite moments of the whole series, but the characters aren't quite as good as they are in book one, and the moments that you have with Logan Ninefingers don't quite hit that same impact that they did in book one, which is why I'm going to put it slightly below book one in A tier. Rogue Protocol is book 3 in Martha Wells' Murderbot series, and whilst again it is more of the same, I didn't feel like this one added enough for a book 3 to be ranked that highly. Whilst I enjoyed it, this one particularly is my least favourite of the series, and that's why it's going in the B tier. Actually, it's going in the top of C tier. Bibliomania was the last manga that I read in 2024, and I have also talked about this in another video, my messed up manga video, but Bibliomania basically is a short story that follows Alice, a girl who is traveling through a hotel, and each of the rooms in the hotel is created by the desires of its inhabitant, and it's a really interesting story. It's this strange kind of gothic horror take on Alice in Wonderland, because Alice is trying to escape the hotel, and the further she gets away, the more she loses her humanity. It's extremely interesting. The art is fantastic, and there are some really good plot twists that actually reminded me a lot of the Nier series, which is one of my favorite video games of all time. I definitely recommend Bibliomania, and it is going to go in the bottom of S tier. A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin is a foundational fantasy series. It is a foundational fantasy book. It is one of the first kind of massive fantasy books that came out and drew a lot of people in. However, I think it does show its age, especially for someone like me who likes that entertaining, fast-paced action. This just wasn't it for me, but I can understand the impact that this book has. I can understand that its importance, and I am going to continue reading the series. However, this one is going to be going in the bottom of B tier. Last Argument of Kings is the finale to the First Law trilogy, and once again, Joe Abercrombie did a fantastic job of completely subverting everybody's expectations. I actually think that the strongest part of this book is its unsatisfying ending, which is what most people have the biggest problem with. But the way that this whole series has been subverting expectations and turning the classic tropes of things like Lord of the Rings on their head, it actually is a perfect ending for what Joe Abercrombie was trying to achieve. But the book in itself is very, very high action with full-on wars in this book, and it was really, really, really addictive to read. I did this again on audiobook, and one day I did 7.5 hours in one day reading this, and yeah, it's that kind of addictive. The other two books, again, they do have the better character moments, but this book I did really, really enjoy it, and actually Giselle's character in this book is the best he has been in the whole series. Watching his growth is absolutely phenomenal, and I think this is gonna sit, it's very hard, but I think this is gonna sit just above Before They Are Hanged. The last book I read in the Murderbot series was Exit Strategy, which did offer somewhat of a return to form. We got returning characters that I have more attachment to than some of the other characters we've seen, and Murderbot's growth in this particular book is at its most prominent, so this one's going to go in the bottom of B tier. Next up, we've got my second favourite book of the year, which was Recursion by Blake Crouch. Now, this was another book that I found through my hunt for time travel books, and this one did it so much more interestingly and so much better. I know that a lot of people hate on this book because it's an MCU-ified sci-fi book, but for me, that's exactly what I was looking for, and this just provides such an interesting concept, and the way that it goes through and the way that the action escalates is shocking and enthralling, and I love the two main characters so much, and I just want what's best for them. And yeah, Recursion by Blake Crouch, I don't want to talk too much about it because again, this is one you need to go in like fairly blind, but it's a modern day based sci-fi, it's a science based sci-fi, and it does have time travel, and just the way that they utilize it is so interesting. The concept is fantastic. I 100% recommend this, and actually it is in my top 5 books of all time, so for that reason it's going in S tier, obviously, just below Vinland Saga. Next up, we've got my biggest surprise of the year, which is Fourth Wing. Now, Fourth Wing was a book that I never in a million years imagined I would enjoy. And when I started it, that was exactly the case. I did not enjoy it. The writing is definitely not what I'm used to. I don't particularly think that Rebecca Yarros is a good writer. However, she may be one of the best storytellers that I've ever come across, because oh my god, this book and Iron Flame, I want to add Iron Flame 2, absolutely enthralled the living hell out of me, because I could not put these down and I was hooked. I was theory crafting. I was talking to people about it. I was telling them this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And some of the things I guessed. And it was like, oh, that's so clever because all the hints were there. And some of the things I was so wrong. And I was like, oh, that's so clever because all the hints were pushing us this way. But actually, it wasn't that at all. This book has phenomenal plot twists, and yes, it is a romantasy, so yes, there is that teen angst and quite a lot of graphic sex. Outside of that, this is a fantastic dragon story with amazing plot twists and just so much to digest and think about. And Rebecca Yarros, your plot twisting is insane. It just is, and I was just blown away by the plot twists. The thing I could compare this most to of everything I've read is actually Red Rising. I think it has a lot of similarities to Red Rising. If you are wanting to step your toe into romantasy, then this is definitely the way to go. After about 10 chapters, the romantasy part went out the window, apart from when the sex happened. Fourth Wing is phenomenal, and I know this is gonna be crazy, but I can't quite give it an S tier. However, I know for a fact that in time this is going to go up to an S tier, because to this day I'm still thinking about it. This one is going in the top of A tier, and I will do Iron Flame now as well. That's going, I think it'll have to go just below Fourth Wing, but Iron Flame's plot twists had me aghast. This was such a surprise for me, and I will never ever again say I'm not reading that, I'm not gonna like that. You've proved me wrong. The last book I read this year was Fury of the Gods by John Gwynne, which ended off the Bloodsworn trilogy. This is a trilogy that I have talked about on the channel. I have 2 dedicated videos to the last 2 books. My thoughts on this are conflicted, because if you follow John Gwynne and if you know about John Gwynne, the context of how this book was written and how it actually came into being is extremely inspiring and profound as well. There was a big chance that this book was never going to be written, and the fact that it is here and we do get to finish this series and see where these characters' stories end is really, really great in the context. But I didn't think this book stuck the landing as much as I wanted it to. The scale of the ending was smaller than I wanted it to be, and whilst I enjoyed the book and it did feel like a fitting end for most of the characters, it wasn't the perfect ending I was looking for. Knowing John Gwynne's story and having met him now and spoken to him, he is really an inspiration. So this is gonna have to still be ranked highly for that reason. I think I would probably put this just below the First Floor trilogy. in A tier. And finally, the last thing I read in 2024 was Superman Up in the Sky. If you don't know this already, my best friend, DCU Legacy, who I have a podcast with, recommended me this. He's a massive DC fan. And he was like, you need to read this because this might be one of the best comics ever. And this is 100% going to get you into Superman. And I read it and he wasn't wrong. This is a phenomenal comic. And not only has it gotten me into Superman, it's gotten me into comics. And we're going to be doing a lot more videos on comics in the coming year. But Superman Up in the Sky is a fantastic closed off story that really shows who Superman is and what he believes in and what he is as a symbol. He is this symbol of hope, and he will put everything on the line to save even one person, and that's what the story is about. He's going to save one person because that is what he does. This comic is flipping amazing. It's so good, and it's hard to rank it, but it's probably gonna go just below One Piece in S tier. And yeah, that's my tier ranking for the year of 2024, everything that I read. In 2025, I'm looking to read the same, if not more, and I want to find some amazing series and new stories like I did this year, because I absolutely fell back in love with reading this year. I found some amazing stuff, and I can't wait to continue. But now it's your turn, so in the comments down below, I want to know what you read this year, what your favorite 3 books were, and what you think of the books on my tier list, or if you have any recommendations for me going forward. While you're down there, you can also like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be alerted every single time that I upload. And if you want to support the channel, you can head over to Sci-fi using my affiliate code NerdLounge to get yourself 5% off, and you can buy yourself some books, manga, comics, anything that I've spoken about today, really. Or if you want to be super amazing, you can check out the Patreon, where you can get some rewards for supporting the channel that no one else gets. All the information is down in the description. And last but certainly not least, if you're not sick of seeing this face today, you can check out one of the videos on the left and right of me. They've been picked just for you, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye bye.